Some people learn leadership lessons in some strange and unusual places. For Joanna White, my next guest, she started her journey of leadership on basketball courts in her homeland of Canada. She also took on her first leadership role in a timber mill. For Joanna, who's now the VP of Financial Services at CapGemini, she's had such a diverse and interesting career, and there's so much we can learn from the way she talks about leadership. She's worked in the corporate world and not-for-profit sector, and her leadership and influence has really been something that's had a huge impact on many people. Joanna shares the importance of having mentors and coaches to support you, the importance of acting with purpose and following your passions. I really hope you enjoy my chat with the incredibly generous Joanna White. Awesome. Thank you, Joanna, for making the time. Welcome. It's really great to be able to spend some time chatting with you today. Look, maybe just to start off, tell us a bit about your leadership journey. And I know you've been in banking, consulting, and in this sort of world for some time. Maybe talk us through that journey for us.
Yeah, so I actually took on my first leadership role working in manufacturing in pulp and paper in Northern Alberta in Canada. So I had joined a pulp mill that was actually owned by Procter and Gamble at the time, and I was on their grad rotation program. And my first rotation was actually in the store or inventory part of the business. So we had about $20 million of spare parts that supplied everything that was needed for the pulp mill to keep going. And I was a few months into that rotation, and the leader of the team got a new role. And unbeknownst to me, the team actually sort of went to the vice president of the mill and said, "Could Joanna be our leader?" And
Right.
so very early on, I took on leadership of that team and obviously had great support. I don't know, maybe they thought it would be an easy mark, but had great support from that team. And then within another couple of months, I was then asked to take on the maintenance team as well. And so I have a commerce background. Most of the people in these leadership roles were engineers.
Mhm.
And so I had very, very little technical expertise. And suddenly I was 23 years old and running teams of about 40 people, predominantly men, who, were older and much more experienced than me. So I had to
Mm.
quickly learn how I was going to both add value and build credibility. And in many
Mm.
ways, those are the same sorts of things in an area that I had like zero technical expertise.
Yeah, can I dig on this a bit more? Because
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
really interesting. Firstly, I guess, what do you think it was that they saw in you that they sort of want? Because that's not always the way things work.
Yeah.
Traditionally working with engineering firms now, there's still this sort of, the smartest person gets the top job, most experienced is often up there as well. Rarely would they choose someone who's new and young and doesn't have the technical expertise. What do you think they saw in you there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was, quite some time ago, but they were building a high performance work system. So it was a non-unionized work system in a heavily unionized environment. And I think, I think what I brought to them is I was interested in the leadership side of it and what it took to be a good leader, not necessarily, what screwdriver you needed to tighten, X, Y, or Z, or, when you needed to change the bearings on something. And so I think, a lot of it was I was able to build those relationships with the team. My responsibilities were, number one, safety, number two, reliability. So making sure that the mill kept running, and then cost, and then people, right? And it was very clear, what was required. And so I could have a impact on those areas, and really draw out the expertise that was in the team without having to sort of necessarily have that technical expertise. And I think if I look back on it, that was by far the best leadership training I ever had, because you know, and it's certainly my view on leadership. It's not about leaders having all the answers. It's not about telling people what to do. It's how you actually bring out the best of what the team has and understand, what the blockages are, what's working and what's not. And as a leader, your role should be unplugging those blockages and helping everybody to succeed. So I learned that very, very early on, and I've been forever grateful for
Yeah,
that experience.
look,
Yeah.
it's a that's the sort of lesson that we speak a lot about in the masterclass, the workshops, that people don't learn very early on, which is, the value of curious leadership, of being interested in what people are doing, how things work, what are the challenges, open to not necessarily saying, here's all the answers, or I'm here to make decisions, to say, I'm here to help make this thing work better, right?
Yeah. And it was very helpful because I didn't have any of the answers, right?
That's right.
So I learned, that was the only tool I had in my bag was how can I make your life easier? So yeah.
Which is so interesting, because so many people get promoted based on expertise, and
Yeah.
and therefore they have a what would you say, like they have this veil of, I should know everything, or whereas you just knew that you didn't know, and that was your strength. But I want to try and understand, what was it in you, like what made you look at that role in that way? Because that's, again, it's not common, it's not something that we see, and
Yeah.
certainly stepping into a very manufacturing, process driven, hierarchical world generally, that's unusual. What do you think was in you that drove that?
Yeah. I mean, I think I know we're on video, but I'm actually quite tall, so I was a basketball player for most of my life. And also, so basketball is a very team sport, right? And I was actually a very, very good player. But I always and so, I think probably in every team I played on, I ended up being the captain of the team, but not necessarily because I was the best player, but because I think I've actually figured out how to work well within that team environment and to get everybody firing on all cylinders to some extent. So I think, again, I sort of had that history of how do we as a team achieve something, and how do we drive forward to that. I still, we talk sort of a little bit about life lessons. I remember going to a basketball camp, probably when I was I might have been 12, right? And, the coach said something like, everybody thinks that they want to be the most valuable player, but the most important thing to be is the most improved player. And you can't, it's that sort of how you sort of continually seeking to learn, to improve, that's going to make the difference in terms of many things. So that, that's a lot of what I brought to it as well. And you're right, it's that curiosity.
Mm.
I am fascinated, even, yesterday I was at an audit and risk committee for a nonprofit I'm involved in, and just looking at how leaders influence and how they drive change has always been fascinating to me. And everybody does it a little bit different, and you learn, what works and what doesn't, and what works for you and what doesn't work for you. But yeah, that whole, my role as a leader is to help other people do better. Has served me well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to jump around a little bit, but
Yeah.
you mentioned coaches, and I know it's something that we sort of can sometimes lose sight of when we're so busy studying and working and trying to build our career, that it's actually those interesting lessons that other people teach us.
Mm.
Tell me about some of those sort of coaches or mentors you might have had that helped create that sort of leadership in you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I always had excellent basketball coaches, so that was very good training. I've always had, whether they're formal or, the bank has said, we're giving you a mentor, or we're giving you a coach, which has always been great, or informal, or sometimes I've changed some of those formal ones into informal ones. So I think it's always been helpful. And I would say one piece of advice is, certainly when I've had formal mentoring, you sort of think, oh, what am I going to talk to this person about? You sort of feel like you need to, and you do need to prep for the meetings. And I sort of think, oh, I don't, I'm not really anything that I have, but I've always forced myself to go to those sessions and to talk. And you always walk away from something. So if someone offers you mentoring, take that opportunity to just have that conversation, would be my one piece of advice. But There's a few the best coaches and the best mentors, and I know there's differences between them, um, but they encourage you, right? So you talk about, like, should I apply for this job? I'm not sure I have this capability. It's when they can really say, like, understand what's causing your concern, but then drive it. One example I have is there's one time when I was at one of the banks very early on in my career, and I was offered a role, and I knew, again, like, I throw myself into things. I'm not comfortable throwing myself into things I know nothing about experience, but I was offered a role sort of leading a product area, and I really knew nothing about that product area. Um, and I was pretty confident because women get a feel for these things. Like, there's no other women on this leadership team. They clearly need a woman, and someone's told the executive that unless he had a woman on his team, it was going to affect his bonus or something, right? And so I called a mentor of mine at the time, who was a very prominent senior woman, probably one of the most prominent female directors in the country that I was lucky to have had a relationship with. And I called her up and I said, so I think they're going to offer me this role, and they're only doing it because I'm a woman. And she said, so what? Be the token woman. Take the opportunity. You'll either do well or you'll fail. But, like, you will fail for sure if you don't take it. And I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, home of the Edmonton Oilers, and Wayne Gretzky is the Donald Bradman of ice hockey, as Bradman is to cricket. But he has a great quote. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and that's exactly right. And a good mentor and a good coach will encourage you to take those shots. So it's good to have someone in your corner.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and often they'll see things in you that you downplay, or you put to the back, and stuff like that. Curiosity, that natural curiosity, is that what sort of led you into consulting? Because I've seen you sort of consulting being something you've done often through your career.
Yeah.
That curiosity comes in handy sometimes there.
Yeah, I struggle to explain my CV when I'm being interviewed, because I've done a whole bunch of different things. But part of that is, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. So that's part of it. I like working with people, and I like working on business problems, and you can do that in so many different spheres of life. So to take that opportunity to do those different things is what I've done, really. It's I ended up in banking because I was, had been in consulting. I'd been at Bain. I then started up a nonprofit organization because I saw an opportunity to really drive change in that space. I hadn't intended to spend so much of my time in the nonprofit sector, so was looking for what to do next. I knew I wanted to stay in Australia. I wanted to work for a company that was, I wanted to work in industries where companies were head officed in Australia, and financial services was a good place to do that in. I was very fortunate to get a role in that space. But yeah, I haven't. If I had one piece of advice to people thinking about their careers, you need to think about it, but you also need to relax. Like, you do actually genuinely, there is so much opportunity out there. Yeah.
Well, and when you don't rely on the technical expertise, and you look at leadership as
when you're just making it up, yes.
That's right. It's the classic world of consulting, right? Which is, I don't know, but I'm interested, so let's find out. And I think there's actually a lot. It's underrated in some ways. Were there any big mistakes that you made along the way that turned into some useful lessons for you, or anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got some advice, actually, again, this time through a formal coach at one of the banks, about my sort of personal style, right? And so, as I mentioned before, I'm over 6 feet tall. It's been interesting through this COVID period, because you meet people on screen and then they meet me in person. Like, I didn't realize you were so
You're only
tall.
this big, right? You're only this tall.
Yeah, exactly. So I have quite an imposing stature for a woman. I speak with an accent. I speak quickly. I am curious, so I, have a tendency to pepper people with questions just because I want to know more. And all of that can come across as quite intimidating. And so I had a coach once who said, you know what? You walk into a room and you don't need to say or do anything. People know that you're there. And that was really insightful to me because as a leader, you don't want to be the dominant. You want to have presence, don't get me wrong, but you don't need to be shoving it down people's throat. So getting that really direct feedback on the impact I was having
Mm,
in a room or at a meeting or whatever, again reinforced for me that it's okay. And sit back is the right word, but you don't, like good leaders do talk last. Good leaders
mm,
do ask, not tell. And I really worked on developing that skill. To overcome the sort of natural intimidation that I probably project out there into the world. So
mm,
that's been a big one for me. But yeah, in terms of, I've certainly run my share of or sponsored my share of technology projects that have been disasters, as I'm sure many leaders have. And it's that whole, how do you get down into the detail? What questions do you ask? Yeah, those sorts of things that have gone well and not well, certainly learn from.
yeah, absolutely. And look, I think having that external voice to say, bring those things to your awareness, get a bit of insight, and we often forget, don't we, that whenever it doesn't matter who we are, whenever we enter a room, we change the dynamic. Everything
Mm,
around it changes, and the only question we should ask is that the change? Is that a useful change? Is it the change
yeah,
we want? And how can we make sure that we're having the right impact? Sometimes you want to come in and probably have that that gravitas and that imposing
yeah,
sense, and other times you want to make sure that you don't steal that away from someone else, or
yeah.
however that might play out.
And in my case, it was like you're going to have that impact anyway, so don't feel the need to overplay it. And we've all
Yeah.
I've seen leaders who very talented, very smart, absolutely have a lot to say, but they'll indicate that they want feedback from the team or they want input from the team, but they'll give their point of view first and then wonder why no one else says anything.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? And you're just missing out on the wisdom of the group when you do that. Even if maybe you do have the right answer, but you're not. You can't be sure of that, I think, until you hear from others. And in order to hear from others, you need to give them the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we actually just last week was working with a group on, which is that they had a few extroverts and quite a few introverts. And we actually sort of said, as a leader, first of all, if you go in and say, hey, we need to choose A, B, or C, I think it's A. Okay, the room now is anchored on A.
Yeah, the answer is now A, right?
The answer's A, and the wrong answers are really
Yeah,
dangerous.
yeah,
The second thing they do is say, okay, I won't say my piece first. I'll open up who would like to speak. And of course, your extroverts, one of them will jump in and say A, and it's a similar sort of dynamic. And
yeah,
so what we say is actually get everyone to quietly, silently write their thoughts down, which one they choose and why, a bit of a description,
yeah,
and then just each person unpack that. Don't try and filter it and change it. Just read what you've read, and then you get a richer sort of information in the room, right?
yeah.
But
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
it's tough to do, and I guess that's one of the big roles I think as a leader. What are the other sort of big roles you see as a senior leader? You're going up. Potentially not with the expertise or not trying to be the expert. What is the role there of the leader then?
Yeah, yeah. And I would say, to be fair to myself, after sort of 15 plus years in banking now, I do consider myself, I do have
You're an expert.
expertise.
Yes, good.
But just to clarify for those that may be wondering, no. I mean, one of the things I do when I interview people about they either about the next role that they want, and I always say, why do you want that role? Like, what do why, basically, and particularly if it's their sort of initial leadership role or a first leadership role, they'll say things like, oh, I'm just ready for the next step. I've got this expertise, I want to get to the next level or whatever. And I think, again, people are missing the point about what leadership is. It's not about you and what you bring, although clearly you should bring something. But it's about what impact you're going to have on the team, and how how you are going to support others. And I think the more senior you get, because you're leading leaders of leaders and those sorts of things, it needs to be how am I working with this group of people or these, vast groups of people to help them do the best that they can possibly do and get the most out of them, because that's going to be the most fulfilling for them. It's, you're going to achieve your business results and those sorts of things. So the more you can remove it from yourself and what you're trying to achieve, and the more you can achieve through others, because that's what leadership is. It's achievement through others, right?
Yeah.
That's critically important, and that is the role of a senior leader. And I think, if I look at, I think in large organizations, unfortunately, there's this, people come across issues or problems, and there's this tendency to not want to rock the boat, right? So whether overtly or covertly, things get swept under the carpet, or they're not sort of dealt with. Um, and I think at times organizational culture can support that sort of parking of issues. And sometimes that's unfair to the individual. Like, if someone raises a risk issue, then suddenly it becomes their problem to fix. And that can be very difficult for the person to fix. Like, there's lots of things. But I think, to be a leader is about, lifting up that carpet, understanding what's really going on, supporting your people to deal with the issues. And that's the only way you're going to go forward. But that is some of the challenge, because there's, we've all worked in large organizations where you don't want to rock the boat. You don't. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's one of the things that we
Well, it's interesting, and again, I'd like to dive into this because something I see that certainly happened at the banks, and
Yeah.
my experience of working at a couple of different banks saw this. People focused on rapport versus trust,
Yeah.
and the difference was everyone smiles, everyone's happy, let's like each other, and be friendly. Whereas trust is, hang on, no, that's not right. We need to do what's right. We need to have tough conversations. Do you see that dynamic at play?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's increasingly changing, right? Like the APRA report into Commonwealth Bank pointed out quite specifically that the culture was too collaborative, which I think is to your point, right? People are friendly to each other, but not willing to challenge, and therefore the real issues don't get dealt with. So I think organizations are increasingly aware of that, but it's a tough culture to shift. And I've certainly been in situations where I felt like I have lifted the carpet, or I have pointed out things, and it's a very uncomfortable position to be in. But you have to go back to, what, how can you sleep at night? What can you live with? Yeah, and yeah, I probably erred on the side raising too many issues than not enough, but I feel comfortable. I sleep well at night as a result of that, and I think I have the respect from my peers and my colleagues as a result of that as well. So
yeah. I think that's the interesting point, isn't it? It's that respect and trust, and we know that you're going to say what needs to be said versus I'm going to get a yes on this. Yeah. And one of the things we talk about a lot is values, and of course before the Royal Commission, most of the banks had the word integrity in their values. During the Royal Commission, it was still there, and it's still there now, and yet what we're seeing though, as you call out, is a shift in the behaviors, which is what's really important there.
Yeah.
Do you see, what are some of the things that are sort of emerging now? And it's a post-COVID crazy little time. The world shifted. What are some of the modern leadership issues that you're sort of seeing or encountering or looking at so far?
I mean, I this whole sort of being on the screen, working from home is all good. Like I value the flexibility as much as everybody else does. And I'm working at home today. One of the things, again, that I learned early on that is important is, history is made by those that turn up, right? Like you have to be in the room, you have to build those relationships, you have to have a point of view. And it's really hard, I think, for people that are working in their bedroom to do that. So, trying to really think about and everything becomes very transactional, right? And therefore, people maybe don't feel safe, or they, like if if it's about raising issues, you may not feel safe doing that. So how we grapple with that, I think, is challenging from a leadership perspective. I think I was listening to something on the weekend around anxiety and how pervasive that is and how debilitating that is in our society. And so how our leaders are we help, playing into that or supporting that, mitigating people's feelings of anxiousness. But I think it's a cultural, societal issue that we don't really answer for. And it's emerging. Like this talk I was listening to on the weekend was sort of saying this is something that is it's in the last decade that anxiety has even become a thing, right? So yeah, how are we thinking about that? Um,
The
yeah,
anxiety piece is really interesting because there's really good research on anxiety drives pessimism, catastrophizing,
yeah,
loss of perspective, it really introspection. It drives us to be very sort of dialed in and focus on negative things. So it's
yeah.
uh,
Focus on negative things, focus on ourself. Whereas we have, like let's look at Australia and the housing crisis we have in this country. Like if we're so individually focused, how are we going to systemically change some of those sorts of things as well? Like there are big issues that we need people to be looking out. We need people to be working together to be looking outwards on to feeling good about themselves, particularly, those of us that are, have jobs and have a place to live and do all those sorts of things. So yeah, I worry about those societal problems as examples. As you say, given how sort of close, and there's good research that says even the fact that we do everything on our phone drives up our cortisol levels, which also causes us to act in ways that we would probably not want to act as well. So
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I've observed in that space that very related is when we look at work as a set of activities and transactional, we sort of our conscious brain, our big smart brain goes, well, that's simple. I can do those transactions and activities anywhere, so that's not a big deal. This is perfectly fine. It's our subconscious brain that needs to feel like it's part of a trusted social group that needs like
yeah,
safety. That part of your brain sees these two worlds as I used to belong over there with this group of people, and now I'm in my kitchen, and
yeah,
this isn't safe anymore. It's or why should I do this work for you? I can do this work for anyone.
yeah.
And
Yeah. Well,
so,
if your only connection to work is your laptop and your email address, it's pretty easy to send that back and get a new one, right?
yeah,
And so but you're still seeking for that. You're still looking for that connect. Yes, you're looking for a promotion or a pay rise or whatever, but I think people will ultimately find that that's not particularly fulfilling
mm,
either. So yeah.
yeah. The research in behavioral economics is very interesting in this space, isn't it? It really talks to we need more than just, and it sounds like with the work you've done charity wise and other spaces, that's something that's important to you as well.
Oh,
This sense of
yeah.
meaning and purpose.
It's very, and I've been very fortunate to have both paid and unpaid jobs where I've been supported by leaders that I've had to spend my time in a variety of different. Like I sit on two charity boards right now, very well supported by my leadership team to do that. And that's the other thing I would say to certainly young people is, and it was advice I got from a senior partner at McKinsey, actually when I was at Bain, but she said, ask for what you want. Like I think too often, particularly when we're early on in our career, there's ways we want to spend our time or projects we want to work on or things we want to do. But until you ask for that, nobody's going to know that you do. And you can't expect that you're going to get it all the time. People are going to tell you no. But if you don't ask, you're guaranteed to be frustrated by it, right? And so I've been very fortunate to ask to do things and generally have been supported to do them, or at least understood, maybe if it's not now, but later, or whatever it is. And so I would certainly encourage people to do that. Whenever I've talked about that in banks, I then get a slew of people asking for pay rises, which is fine. People should have pay rises. But yeah, I certainly have been fortunate to spend my time in a whole bunch of different spheres, and I learn from each of those that inform each other, which has been fantastic. So
Yeah, it's. I think you're 100% right. I've for many reasons, fallen into doing some work in charities, running foundations, working with the not-for-profit sector. I think sometimes when I work with corporates, they go, "Oh, I wish I could work in a not-for-profit. Everyone would be fun. There'd be rainbows and unicorns." And of course, you get in there, it's a whole messy world of more
Yeah,
challenges.
there's fewer resources, roles are unclear.
Yeah, passion's
Expectations are just as
often
high. Yeah,
passion's dialed up to 50, and everyone's sort of jumping out of their skin. And yet,
yeah.
it's totally. There's probably some really good leadership lessons from working in that space that you can bring back a
Oh,
piece.
yeah. And there's nothing more frustrating, I think, than being in a nonprofit where, somebody comes from a corporate organization and goes, "Oh, well, clearly I work in a corporate. I'm going to tell you how to do your job." And you're like, wait a minute. Like we face different challenges. We face some of the same challenges. We face different challenges. But that's why, again, I feel like being able to have worked in both sectors gives
Yeah,
me a great perspective on, um, yeah, how things are done differently in both those sectors, and what the frustrations and what the skills and qualities are of people. And the leadership qualities and expertise of people in the non-profit sector is greater, or if not more than
yeah.
those that have had the benefit of working in the corporate sector. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember saying to someone, because they had that sort of directional arrogance, right? Well, we're the smart people and they're the poor
Yeah.
not-for-profits. And I said to them, and just so you're clear, they can motivate like 100 people to do incredible amounts of work, pay them nothing. Your
Yeah.
team, your score, your engagement score, and your team, you pay them top dollar, and they don't want to be there. So just
That's right.
let's
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about who's got the upper hand on this space.
Very,
Um,
very good example. Yes.
Look, just finally, and thanks so much for your time, Joanna. This has been really interesting. Is there someone who you really admire as a leader? Maybe why that might be the
Can
case.
I give you three, Daniel?
Please, we'd love
So,
three.
so one, and I won't go into great detail of it, but I have taken great inspiration for many years from the life and writings of Maya Angelou, right? So, she was poor, she was Black, she was uneducated, she was pregnant at 16. Like her life could not have been more different than mine. But in reading about her story and what she has to say in her poems, I just, if I ever sort of feel like I just need a bit of a lift or a bit of encouragement, I pull out something she's written. And so I would encourage people to do that.
Mm.
Um, when I was at Bain and then starting Australian Charities Fund, which became Workplace Giving Australia, I worked with this incredible leader called Greg Hutchinson. He is smart, thoughtful, giving. He would, started Bain in Australia, but if he came to your desk to ask you to do something, he would kneel down next to you and, ask you to do whatever he was asking you to do. So in terms of, and he's been like, he's the most humble man, like nobody would ever know this, but he's been the driving force behind so many philanthropic, social benefit initiatives in this country. I often think, like when I'm in a bit of a pickle, what would Greg do, right? And so it's been he's somebody. If he ever listens to this, he'd be mortified that I even mentioned his name. He's, it's that humble servant leadership that embodies. And then just as a final one, and again. So I chair Opportunity International, which is an organization that does microfinance in India and Indonesia. And in our boardroom, we have a series of pictures that are sort of taken, from the field. So typically women and families in India and Indonesia. Anyway, there's this one woman, sort of small picture, and Indian woman, beautiful, but she's got a bit of a snarl on her face. And whenever I'm in that boardroom, I look up at her and I just think she is saying to me, come on, like I'm doing what I can to get my family out of poverty. I need your help and you can do better.
Mm.
And it's just that motivation to see her. I don't even know what her name is, but it's that whole like, come on, we can do better.
Yeah.
Lift your game. So that's the sort of stuff that inspires me. And those are leaders that inspire me.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love that. That last example where sometimes it's just that story, that the connection. That when we're thinking about whether you're in banking, insurance,
Yeah,
mining, it's so easy to get focused on the stuff in front of us, but at the back of is a person who
that's right.
matters, and there's a
Yeah.
life that we need to change and support. And that sounds like it's a very common thread throughout your journey. It's always
Mm,
been about helping others improve and be a better version of themselves, whether it was at the paper mill or in the banks or consulting or
yeah.
in your charity endeavors. That sounds like a really common thread, Joanna.
Yeah.
And look, it's been an absolute pleasure. I want to thank you. And if people want to get in touch with you, can they reach out through LinkedIn or something like
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. To connect with me through LinkedIn, Joanna White. I'm there currently at CapGemini, but yeah, happy to have a chat. And
Amazing.
I love nothing more than working with young people and helping them connect. So
All
very,
right, you might have a few people asking for mentorship, so
we'll
hopefully
see
they'll
how we
come
go.
through kindly. Thanks so
Sounds
much,
good.
Joanna. It's been a real pleasure.
Love. Thanks very much, Daniel. Take care. you.